Morning. Hopefully, at this point, you have read your three uh, Transcendentalism introductory texts: Nature by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Self-reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Learned Astronomer by Walt Whitman. So, what I'm going to do is we're going to just briefly introduce in this video what Transcendentalism is. We're going to go over some of the key people, two of the key people, and some of their most famous quotes. This is just a encompassing, short little review of it. And then in the next series, we're going to do a lesson on Self-reliance by Emerson, Nature by Emerson, and then we'll move into Thoreau and Whitman and all that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a presentation and just go along like I always do. Okay, so Transcendentalism is one of my favorite things to teach. It is all about hope. We've had a lot of negativity, learning about the Puritans with the Scarlet Letter and the Crucible, and then even the poetry of Langston Hughes. Poetry of Langston Hughes it was overly hopeful. However, it was dealing with this issue of this racial inequality and this racism that it is coming back full force today, and all the stuff that's going on across America, across the world. Transcendentalism fits in extremely well and is very timely with what's happening in the world today. So right here, transcend, all right? Transcend, the root word, ism. Transcend means to rise above, to be better than what you can be. Sometimes musicians or athletes are referred to as transcendent, like LeBron James, Michael Jordan, King Griffey Jr., Tom Brady. They're referred to as transcendent. In other words, they do stuff that hasn't been seen before. They're better than everyone else and better than anything that's come along. Musicians, Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, these people that'll be remembered in the future. They change the way something is done. All right, and then ism is a study of. All right, now first quote right here. It was a high counsel that I once heard given to a young person: always do what you are afraid to do. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Basically, it means it was good advice that I once heard given to a young person: always do what you're afraid to do. So in other words, if you don't ever take chances in life, you're never going to succeed. One of the writing prompts I give to my students as they prepare for the CLEP test is, those who always fly low are never able to soar. Do you agree? In other words, if you don't take chances in life, can you be a great success? This is what Emerson is saying. You must take chances in order to succeed. And usually when you take a chance, it's something that you're afraid of doing. Now, that doesn't mean jump out of an airplane without a parachute because you're afraid of doing that, or go swim with crocodiles because you're afraid to do that. It's common sense. It's things like ask that girl or that boy out, take that new job, etc. So what was Transcendentalism? It was a literary movement in the 1830s. It established a clear American voice. Now, what I mean by American voice is this is what we believe here. This is what we believe as Americans. This is what everyone can achieve. The thing about the Transcendentalists, they were extremely, they would be called extremely, they were like socially liberal, okay? But they were like conservative as well, if that makes any sense. In other words, they didn't want handouts. They didn't want things from other people. They wanted you to do your own stuff, and you wanted to rely on yourself. But they had this great, deep compassion. They were staunchly abolitionists. They were very against slavery. In this American voice, this is what we can be as America. This is what this meant, Transcendentalism. This is what we could be if we all tried and we all did our best. It was first expressed by Emerson in his philosophy titled Nature. Now, this is not, except for the poetry of Whitman and Dickinson, these are all essays. And this isn't like a 5-paragraph essay like you maybe think about writing. These are like pages and pages and pages of non-fiction ideas of what we can be. It has a belief in a higher reality than is achieved by human reasoning. Suggests that every individual is capable of discovering this higher truth through intuition. Excuse me. In other words, everyone can achieve this. Everyone can rise to these higher levels of being. They were very, very pro-nature. They wanted to go out and to be nature. They weren't necessarily religious, but they were very spiritual people, and they were of the opinion that to be close to God, you had to go out and be in nature, and we're going to talk more about that. So unlike Puritans, they saw humans and nature as possessing an innate goodness. They are the exact opposite of the Puritans. The Puritans were cold and harsh, and they believed that people were evil, whereas the Transcendentalists were open and loving and believed that we can be good. We are good. This quote here by Walt Whitman: "In the faces of men and women, I see God." They're the opinion that there's this lesson taught in theology, especially in the Western Hemisphere, of God creating man in his own image. And so Whitman would say here that we are as close to God as humanly possible, etc. And also the kindness, a kind gesture is an example of divinity. They opposed strict ritualism and dogma of established religion. They didn't think that it was cool to go to a church and sit and do the same things over and over and over again, rote memorization, singing hymns, all this kind of stuff. They thought that if you were going to have a spiritual gathering, it should be outside, it should be spontaneous, it should be for love and not habit. Beautiful nature. All right, so they believed in living close to nature and the importance of nature. Nature is the source of truth and inspiration. They would be of the opinion that the place where you're listening to this right now, whether it be in a house or a car, or maybe you're outside, that's awesome. But if you're inside of a house, that is the house that was made for you by humanity, by someone. They made it, they constructed it. You go outside, that's the house that a God made for you. And this is not God as in the Christian God. This is not God. This is not Allah. This is not anything like that. This is just a spiritual, deeper belief in the universe. So when I refer to God here, I don't mean any particular religion. I'm just talking to their point of view, spiritual. All right, so they taught the dignity of manual labor, whereas the Puritans had some similarities with Transcendentalists. They believed in strong self-reliance. They believed in manual labor. In other words, what manual labor is, don't pay someone to do something that you can do yourself. Go out, toil, do what you have to do your own thing. Advocated self-trust and confidence. Valued individuality, nonconformity, and free thought. Not be like everybody else because you're afraid of being ostracized. Advocated self-reliance and simplicity, and that's a big one we're going to get to when we get to Thoreau. All right, so our first Transcendentalist, the man on the right, is Ralph Waldo Emerson. He is the father of it, basically, and the fellow on the bottom with that awesome chin beard is Henry David Thoreau. Emerson was the teacher. Thoreau was the pupil. All right, so now let's go into some of their quotes. These is Emerson. Now I'm going to jump back and forth between Emerson and Thoreau. So this is probably one of the most important quotations from Emerson. "There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide." It is, sorry. All right, now this first line right here. It doesn't say there is a time in every man's life. It says there's a time in every man's education. The reason why it says every man's education is because you should never stop learning. You'll be 90 years old. You should keep learning. You should be on your deathbed. Keep learning. Now, that doesn't mean go out and, learn grammar and stuff like that, but always learn new things. A story that I like to tell is, saw something on the internet where someone overheard a 90-year-old husband and an 80-year-old wife, and he was teaching her how to pump gas because she had never pumped it before. And we're not getting into gender roles and all that kind of stuff because, it's a different time, people who grew up a long time ago. And so he'd always pumped the gas for her. And she was like, "I don't understand. Why do I have to do this? I'm 80 years old, so. And he told her, "I'm not always going to be around to do this for you. You need to learn." The point there is that an old woman, 80 years old, never done something before in her life, needs to continue to learn. So that's why Emerson says, every man's education. When he arrives at the realization, that's what that conviction word means, that envy is ignorance. That, in other words, being envious of someone is stupid. It's stupid to be envious. Imitation is suicide. It doesn't mean actually killing yourself. Imitating someone, trying to be like somebody else and not wanting to be yourself. Or, that's kind of weird, but basically like if you're not happy with yourself and you're trying to be something else than who you're not, then that's killing a part of your soul. Now, that doesn't mean not to be, like if you see someone and you want to improve to be like them, that's different. Basically, if you don't like who you are and what God gave you, and if you want to do it for yourself, that's great. But if you want to do it for somebody else, to be like somebody else or to please somebody else, that's killing part of your soul. Trust thyself. In other words, go with your gut for the most part. Don't get down on yourself. Don't second guess yourself. What I must do is all that concerns me, not what people think. In other words, if you think something is right, do it. Go against the grain. Don't be part of the crowd. Don't fall in line with a bully because you're afraid. To be great is to be misunderstood. In other words, people who are great and do great things are going to make enemies. And he has a really good line in there about all great men in the past. And this is sexist, yes, I know, but you got to remember the time it was written. It should be, men. When he says men here, it refers to mankind, men and women. To be great is to be misunderstood. In other words, to achieve something beyond normal and mediocrity, you're going to upset some people, and they're not going to understand. And when you change who you are, those people that you leave behind are not going to understand. We're going to get more into that later. Now, Thoreau. Moving on to a little bit of Thoreau here. Thoreau, and actually we're going to focus more on Thoreau throughout this than we are Emerson. So, Walden. This little picture here of his house. So Thoreau decided that he did not like the way the world was in the 1850s. He thought that we were too consumed with commercialism and wants and need and frivolity. That was in 1850. You drop him down into Times Square or anywhere today, he probably would have a heart attack. So he decided he wanted to live essentially. So he built a cabin on land owned by Emerson in Concord, Massachusetts, near Walden Pond. That's why his essay is called Walden. He lived alone there for 2 years, studying nature and seeking truth with himself. He basically just said, I want to see if I can do this. I went into the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front on the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it has to teach, and not when I came to die discover that I had not lived. In other words, I wanted to see, can I do this? I want to go out and learn about myself. There are so many things pulling at us outside that we can't really get to the root of what it means to be a human, because we have all of these vices and sins pulling on us and distractions. Heaven is under our feet as well as over our heads. Now, this is more of their spiritual beliefs. This is what I meant when I talk about nature, that going outside is as close to heaven as they would feel that going outside is as close to heaven as someone can get. So, without dying, of course. And so to go outside and to be in nature is to be part of God's creation. That's the world that he made or she made or it made or whatever your theological beliefs are. That is the world that, or if you have theological beliefs, that is the world that was made by a higher power. Still, we live meanly like ants. Our life is frittered away by detail. Why should we live with such hurry and waste of life? Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I say, let your affairs be as 2 or 3 and not 100 or 1,000. People are consumed and obsessed with buying things, buying the next thing, wanting. As we learned with The Great Gatsby and the expression keeping up with the Joneses, people care so much about having the next thing. And people work jobs that they hate to impress people that they don't like. That's a riff off of Fight Club. Thoreau was basically like, why? Why do you do it? And the entire American economy, the entire capitalistic economy worldwide is tied to that. Just tied to that. To people to buy things they don't need. That's what it is. People to buy things they want. But people go into great amounts of debt, and they end up not having enough money to pay for important things. They don't have savings in the event of, Corona, the shutdown. People didn't have savings because they live paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes they can't help it. Sometimes they live paycheck to paycheck because their job doesn't pay very much at all, and they're paying their basic necessities. But other times, a lot of people they're so frivolous, and they live in a house that they don't need, a giant house, or they buy a very expensive car they don't need, or a boat, or a four-wheeler, or all kinds of things, because they think it'll make them happy, but then they don't have the money later on, or they can't help their kids go to college, or things like that, and the cycle perpetuates. Individuality. How deep the ruts of tradition and conformity. Now, this is a little bit different, because when he wrote this idea of conformity and being like the crowd, it was very encouraged, and that's what everybody did. We didn't have nearly as many of the different diverse voices that we have in America now. Now it's like people want to be their own selves. They want to be so individual that it's ironic that that's also almost become conforming, because everybody wants to be this different. Does that make sense to you? Everybody wants to be different, so if everybody wants to be different, that means that they're all kind of conforming and being the same. It makes sense in my brain. All right. Now, yes, this is an odd example. This is a PowerPoint from long ago. I need to update it. If you don't know who these people are, Flavor Flav, Marilyn Manson, these are different, all right? If a man does not keep with the pace of his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music he hears, however measured or far away. In other words, like, if you are a liberal, a Democrat living in the Deep South, you probably feel like, ugh, I don't agree with anything here, but you may be afraid to express your views. Why? Because your fear of ostracization, being ostracized. And it goes back to those quotes earlier we're talking about from Emerson. If you're a conservative and you live in California or Oregon, you may the exact same thing. You're somebody, but it's okay to be yourself. You need to not be afraid to be yourself, even though everyone around you is a certain way. And we're going to get deeper into that when we get into Thoreau. This is just an opening. Civil disobedience. What you're seeing right now in America is show of civil disobedience. The protests and things of that nature. Civil disobedience. The word civil means friendly, kind, respectful. Disobedience means to disobey. Now, yes, we have some riots and we have some issues here, but for the most part, what's been going on, the death of George Floyd and all of this, the police brutality and the calls to change and the systemic racism and all that, the protests have been shows of civil disobedience. Thoreau coined this, and his usage and his words inspired people since 1850. And one of the big inspiration, the most famous is Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King, the Civil Rights Movement. He used a lot of the tactics and the beliefs and the words from Thoreau during his crusade. And the practice is still being felt today. If injustice is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say break the law. Let your life be the friction that stops the machine. Now, this is deep here, man. This is like, it's like if injustice exists anywhere, it's a threat to freedom. That quote like that. So basically, Thoreau is telling you, look, if there's a law and it's an unjust law and it hurts somebody else, you have a moral obligation to go against it. We're going to get much deeper into that. Civil disobedience. I mean, you don't need me to tell you about civil disobedience. Just turn on the news. That is just a basic introduction. Some of the key quotes. We're going to get much deeper into this. We're going to study tomorrow, or the next lesson is going to be about self-reliance and Emerson's quotes and his very deep belief in doing for yourself. After that, we're going to do nature. Then we're going to move into Thoreau and Whitman. If you have not read the 3 readings that I put up on the portal, please do so. And we will go over them until I see you again. It's a great day to be a warrior.